Doamnelor și domnilor, un interviu în exclusivitate pentru Antena 3 CNN. Astăzi am avut privilegiul de a-l întâlni pe generalul Phil Breedlove, cel care a fost comandantul suprem al forțelor aliate din Europa. Este a doua întâlnire a mea cu generalul Breedlove. Faptul că a avut poziția militară numărul 1 în NATO, faptul că a venit în România, a participat la o conferință de Forumul de Securitate la Marea Neagră și în regiunea Balcanilor, organizat de New Strategy Center, arată importanța de care se bucură România în momentul de față din partea aliaților. Generalul Breedlove, un cunoscător extrem de fin al detaliilor privind profilul militar al Rusiei, intențiile pe care le are în legătură cu acest război asupra Ucrainei, mentalitatea rusească și, dacă vreți, o anticipare a modului în care Rusia ar vrea să declanșeze un război în toată Europa dacă va reuși să treacă de Ucraina. Generalul Breedlove, în această seară, în exclusivitate, ne dă cele mai interesante detalii în legătură cu contraofensiva Ucrainei, care ar putea să însemne, atenție, eliberarea de sub invazia rusească sau dispariția definitivă a statului ucrainean. Asta înseamnă prezența trupelor războinice ale Rusiei la frontiera României. În calitate de fost comandant al forțelor aliate din Europa, generalul Breedlove a comandat toate trupele, știe exact care sunt elementele de detaliu, de culise ale armatei ruse și vedem chiar acum dezvăluirile pe care le-a făcut într-un interviu exclusiv pentru Antena 3 CNN. Doamnelor și domnilor, la Forumul de Securitate pentru Marea Neagră și Balcani avem marea plăcere să avem un dialog cu generalul Philip Breedlove, fostul comandant al forțelor aliate din Europa. General Breedlove, thank you for having this interview. It's a great pleasure to see you again.
It's good to be back with you.
General Breedlove, the Black Sea security area become a war zone because Russia invaded Ukraine and because this war is longer than we expected. What is the perspective of the Black Sea security and what NATO should do in order to enforce this area where 3 NATO members are Romania, Bulgaria, and Turkey?
So we have long known how important the Black Sea is. But in a matter of fact, because there were so many other world issues going on, I'm afraid that we in the West, in the past, have not paid enough attention to this part of the world. And of course, the invasion, the first 2 invasions of Ukraine by Russia in 2014, when they invaded and occupied Crimea and then invaded the Donbass, this brought this more to the attention of the rest of the world. But Russia has proven once again that we have not really been paying enough attention, as they now have opened a much broader war that really engulfs the whole northern part of the Black Sea and the land spaces around it. And what we see is a world superpower, we've called them that in the past, has amassed its army, crossed an internationally recognized border, and invaded a neighbor country. And they have unleashed a horrible, inhumane, illegal war that now we in the West have to deal with. And so we, I think now, have taken a proper focus on how important this part of the world is. The Western nations, I do not think, have responded enough yet, but they are beginning to respond to the needs of this area and to the needs of Ukraine. And what we have seen in this war is how important this part of the world is. Just the interruption of the grain supplies last year. You saw what happened on the world markets and with hunger. And so I think now the good news of this horrible war is that the West and the rest of the world are paying more and more appropriate attention to the Black Sea.
As a former Supreme Allied Commander of forces in Europe, General Breedlove, what is your evaluation on the Russia's capability to prolong this war? Because everybody hopes the war will end as soon as possible. And there are different evaluations about the Russia's capability from military point of view to prolong this war. Is it possible, or Russia could be defeated by Ukraine?
So what I'm going to say may not make some happy, but Russia's ability to prolong this war, I think, is entirely up to the Western nations. What we have seen so far in this war is that when we give Ukraine what it needs, and a Ukrainian unit on the ground meets a Russian unit on the ground, the Ukrainian unit wins, strategically defeating Russia north of Kyiv, strategically defeating Russia north and northwest of Kharkiv, operationally defeating Russia in the vicinity of Kherson, and now it looks like tactically defeating Russia in the neighborhood of Bakhmut. So when the West gives Ukraine what it needs to fight and win, Ukraine fights and wins. So a large portion of the determination of how long this war lasts, it really depends on how the West supports Ukraine. If we give them what they need to win, they will defeat Russia and this war will come to a quicker end.
But Russia has huge human resources capability. They rely on quantity, not on quality.
No doubt about it. And if we allow that bulk quantity to be the defining moment of this war, then it will last for a long time. But I say once again, when the West gives Ukraine what it needs, Ukraine defeats Russia. And that's what we need, is for Ukraine to win the war in Ukraine and move Russia out of Ukraine. And then we can begin to bring peace to this part of the world.
Can you give us some hints about how this Ukrainian counteroffensive should be done in the next months in order to liberate their territory?
So, boy, I don't like that question, but I will attempt an answer. Here's why I don't like it. The Ukrainian military has done a really good job, have they not? Everyone thought, this war was going to be over in days. And the Ukrainians have prepared a wonderful defense in depth, and they have fought and defeated, as we just outlined, Russia in many parts, retaking all that land that was taken in the original blitzkrieg. So I would be very hesitant to tell Ukraine how to fight, because they're doing a great job. Right. If I was planning it, I think my most important focus would be on cutting the land bridge to Crimea, retaking control of the water supplies for Crimea, dropping the Kerch Bridge, and thereby isolating Crimea, and then beginning to attack in depth, not by land forces, but by air and rocket and artillery forces, attack in depth into Crimea. Crimea is key territory in the long-term viability of Ukraine, and I think the West needs to be completely focused on Ukraine's ability to retake and hold Crimea.
According to Russian military doctrine, General Breedlove, Russia considers the invaded territories from Ukraine as part of Russian Federation. And if somebody attacks those territories, I mean Crimea and Donbass, to be liberated, they could use a tactical nuclear weapon. This is the main threat, and do you think this is possible, and what consequences will be?
So let's just get the facts straight right up front. None of that Ukrainian territory, and I call it that for a reason, none of that Ukrainian territory is Russian. They have invaded, and they are occupiers, just like wars throughout history. And the occupying force is not the owner of Ukraine, okay? Ukraine is in control of Ukraine. And so we need in the West to remember that in all of our policy decisions. Crimea is not Russia. The Donbass is not Russia. They are both Ukrainian. And so, yes, I understand the rest of your question. I think that it's important to note that Mr. Putin's military is failing him in Ukraine. So his military attack and war on Ukraine is failing. But what is succeeding for Mr. Putin is his war of intimidation, or as we say in the military, his war of deterrence. And I think that early in this war, the West told Mr. Putin what they were afraid of. The West said, we're afraid of nuclear weapons, and the West said, we don't want this war to expand. Those are what we fear. And so what is it that Mr. Putin plays back to us almost daily? Someone in Russia is talking about nukes and nuclear war and the eventual use of nukes. And someone in Russia, on a less frequent basis, but still frequently, are talking about this war will get wider, and they love to talk about how American soldiers will once again die in Europe. And so I think this war of intimidation that Mr. Putin is fighting against the West is succeeding rather well for him. Ergo, you asked me this question. Everybody is concerned about what Mr. Putin wants us to be concerned about. His war of intimidation, of deterrence, is working. Of course, we have to intellectually understand and agree that he might actually use a nuke. But I would tell you that the most important thinkers and writers these days are every day talking about how that is less likely about whether he would use one or not, because his power, his ability to influence, to completely control matters in Russia is dwindling and getting smaller every day. So I dodged your question. I think that we have to intellectually understand that that could happen. Most believe the likelihood of that is diminishing day by day. But what we also have to understand is we're allowing Mr. Putin to deter us. And we need to determine how we can stop being deterred and make Mr. Putin worried about what we're going to do and deter him.
General Breedlove, as a former soccer, are you afraid that a certain military collision between Russia and NATO could happen? Because the term of war between Russia and NATO, it's way too strong. But are we in a danger of a military collision between Russia and NATO?
Well, we're certainly at a higher probability of that than we were 3 years ago, or even maybe now before 2014. As long as Russia is being belligerent, as long as Russia is using its military force to cross boundaries in Europe, as long as Russia is creating what really is the largest war since World War II in Europe, yes, we are at a higher probability or possibility of having an intersection between NATO and Russia. But this is completely, absolutely, 100% as a result of Russia's illegal, immoral, and inhuman war on Ukraine.
General Breedlove, Congressman Mike Rogers, in an analysis that was launched 1 week ago, said that the center of gravity of NATO should be transferred from the west to the east side, to the eastern flank of the alliance. And he also proposed that permanent US military bases should be in Poland, Romania, and other countries on the eastern flank. Do you agree with this evaluation?
Well, I think that we need to look at that. If you look back at what I have said when I was the SACEUR and after I retired from the SACEUR, I've always been a proponent of more U.S. capability in our eastern nations. Many in those countries like to call it the Eastern Front. And I do believe that more U.S. capability and capacity in those nations is a very important feature of a long-time peace in Europe.
Romania is on the first line of the confrontation with Russia and with the war. The Black Sea area was transformed in a war zone by Russia. What do you tell to the Romanian people that worries so much if a confrontation with Russia could occur. They are afraid that the Russians are so close, they are aggressive, they launch a war, and they could come to this first line of defense in Romania.
So I will just reiterate what our president has said, what NATO has said, the Secretary General, what the SACEUR has said in his writings and speaking. All of them say the same thing. We will defend every inch of NATO. Every inch of NATO. And so I know that was my attitude when I was the SACEUR. And I think now our politicians, both left and right, are saying these same words. Most of them. We have some fringe politics as well, but most of our political structures, our military structures all say the same thing. So I would assure Romania has been an important part of the new NATO, okay? And so I think Romania should rest in assurance that NATO will be there.
General Philip Breedlove, thank you so much for this interview.
Thank you.